So over the years, I've built a handful of small little Python utilities and scripts and add-ins for Fusion that kind of helped me solve problems I had personally, helped improve my workflow, some small quality of life enhancements for using Fusion. So I decided to go through and just kind of get all of them collected into one area. They were scattered across different folders. Some I put on GitHub, some I didn't, some I've forgotten about. So I've recently gone through and tried to organize them and combine them. And what I've come up with is my utility toolbox. And what this is a dynamic React app inside of Fusion that will dynamically populate a list of scripts and add-ins that I've written and added to the add-in folder. And so far, here are the current ones that I've added. And here you can toggle them on or off. If you toggle all of them off within a single section, it'll collapse and dim that section. And it'll tell you how many for that section there are. Currently, I only have 9. This will give you the total count of the utilities that the add-in has found. This will be up on GitHub. It's open source. So if you end up wanting to add your own scripts and utilities to this later on, you can. And much like my fretboard maker add-in from earlier this year, this is built on the same kind of foundation and architecture. So we have this collapsible sidebar over here and then different pages within it. First page is the utilities. This is actually where you can toggle and read up a little bit about each of the add-ins. Support, if you're a fan of this and you want to support the progress, that'd be great. About, again, just a simple about what everything is, link to the GitHub, current releases, and changelog will keep you up to date with what has been added or changed. And this is set to dynamically populate. So if you do install this and later on I push an update to GitHub, say I do v0.5, you'll get a little notification dot. And that'll let you know, hey, there's a new version. Let me check it out, see if it's worth updating to. And then down here is just an issues button. This will take you to the actual issues link. And then help is just a little bit more in-app knowledge for you to see what's going on, with a couple more links to the settings folder, again, report an issue, and then view on GitHub. Kind of redundant, but kind of important to help me know what's not working or what I can improve upon. So to go to the actual utilities, again, some of these are super simple, some of these a little bit more complex. None of these I think are like super breathtaking or earth-shattering that would be like, oh wow, this is super cool, let me add this as a unique standalone add-in. Again, these are just kind of a handful of little nuts and bolts that I think improve different aspects of current Fusion that I think might currently be lacking. So if we were to go to the zoom to selection, that's exactly what it says. And this is kind of one that I'm surprised isn't native. It's super common. I'm sure you've used it, and if you've ever used Blender or other digital content creation applications, I'm sure they all have this. And all this does is zooms to the selection. I've bound this to my Z key. Natively, the Z key is available in the Fusion shortcuts. So Z for zoom, I think that works out pretty well. And you just click something, hit Z, and it zooms to it. This is getting clipped because of that. But simple, nothing crazy. I think it's super useful, and you can change the padding, and all that means is the area around it. So basically how tight into that zoom you get. So larger the number, kind of further away. And then all of these you can bind a shortcut to. So if you want, you can do that. If there's some of them that are like, oh, cool, I'm going to use this a lot more often than I think. So there's the navigation one. The next one is convert parameter units. And this one's actually kind of big. I started this one a long time ago when I was building fretboard files and I was trying to share them with people. Why is that stuck? Oh, great. Is this going to crash and embarrass me in front of all my friends? No. Okay, thankfully. So if I were to open up my parameters, I have quite a bit of user-defined parameters that I've written and added into this file. And they're all in the imperial unit of inch. And if I wanted to share this with somebody who works in millimeters and doesn't work in inch, it kind of sucks for them because they're like, oh, well, here I am working in this nasty standard versus the tried and true God-given millimeter. So what this one will do is this will take all your parameters, and you can say, oh, I want these to be in millimeter. It fetches what your current unit is. You say, okay, I'm in inch, and I want it to be millimeter. And what this is going to do is this is going to manually convert. There's a little dance behind the scene. It involves adding a temporary prefix to everything you have, creating duplicates, reassigning those, deleting the prefix, and deleting the original, because you can't go in and change the unit once a parameter is connected to a sketch or a feature. Currently, the only thing you can do is change the unit if it's just a parameter that has no assignment. Hopefully that's something Fusion fixes in the future. It seemed like last year they were working toward that. I haven't heard anything about it since. But anyways, this is going to tell you that, okay, we found 75 parameters that, and 70 of those carry a length unit. And it's going to go through and it's going to, behind the scenes, like I said, it's going to go through your parameter list and rename them, reassign them, remove them, things like that. And depending on how complex your scene is or your document, it could take a little bit. But it says, hey, we've switched to millimeter, processed 75 out of the parameters, only converted to 70. And the first thing we notice is our units is now changed from inch to millimeter, which is nice. And if we open up our parameters again, we will now see that all of our parameters are now been converted to millimeter. And then here are those 7 that they didn't, our angles. So it didn't touch any of our angles, it just did our distances. And this works really well if you have cleanly defined parameters and expressions. If you're in here and you're mixing and matching variables with measurements, it might not work as well, or if at all, to be honest. So again, pretty useful, but it might not necessarily work, if lack of a better word, kind of sloppy. So we have that one for converting units. Don't want to do that again. Another one we have is for parameter names. And what this will do, same thing, this goes through, it looks at all your parameters, pulls all the names, gives you this middle column. And what it will try to do is if there's a natural break, so I write my parameters in Pascal case, and each word ends with a lowercase, then each new word begins with a capital case. So it's easy to distinguish the separation. So if you don't have this space in the middle, you can say, okay, well, I can tell that's fret and count. But if we go through and do something like fret count with no actual casing to it, it's just one long word with no distinction between the two words. And we run our parameter names again. Well, did it not populate? 74? Oh, there we go. Had to turn off the only show what will change. So we see here fret count. It doesn't understand how to separate that. This isn't using any AI or anything behind the scenes, so it's not going to be able to say, oh, I know what you really wanted to do, so I'm going to do that for you. It's just looking for this standardization in the separation and in the casing. So if you have something like this, you can easily go through and separate that. And now it knows for camel case to appropriately rename that. And then you can say, well, I want upper snake case and things like that. So it's a good way to just kind of tidy up all your parameter names if you're going through and you're just kind of willy-nilly throwing names at it. This is kind of a cleanup pass that you can easily do to see what needs fixed. And then if we go to the next one, conversion table, do with this what you will. When I first published this, for some reason, a lot of people were offended by it. I don't know. Because they were like, well, Fusion will automatically do it for you, and it will. So if you type in 15 millimeters, it can convert it to inch for you. But if you have OCD like myself, and when you're working on a certain file and you were like, well, I want to make sure I'm working and all my things adhere to the same fractional value of a 32nd. So everything I do, I want to make sure it's in 30 seconds. And if you don't have that all memorized, it's almost like a second language. This is a good reference to go through and see, okay, well, I know my calipers say 5/16, but what are they in decimal inches? You can input that. It converts it anyways. I get it. Again, this is just kind of visual reference. And then if you click on any of these cells, it'll copy it to your clipboard, and then you can paste it in later on. So I think it's useful. Some may not. And then if you toggle this on, it'll show you all the way up to 1/28. And then this one's kind of nice, selection history. And what this will do is you select on something. Something is lagging. Probably time for a good old RAM dump. All right, sorry about that. So selection history, you can go through and you can specify how many steps backwards you want to do. So like your how many steps you want to remember. And then this will work across documents. So if you're in one document and you have some selections and then you move to another document and you select some things there, moving back to that original document, it remembers where it left off. And then I have this assigned to W. So if I were to select this, deselect it, hit W, it reselects it. So if I were to be like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and it'll work backwards in the chain of the selection. And I find this really useful for things like when I'm sketching and I'm assigning constraints and I want to assign multiple constraints to the same sketch entity. It can be kind of annoying when you assign one and then it deselects, then you have to reselect it and assign it again. I find this really useful with spline handles. So if I have these two, I select them both and say, okay, well, I want these to be horizontally and vertically constrained. That's great, but then it deselected them. So if I hit W, it reselects them. Okay, now I want them to be equal. And now they are. So that keeps me from having to go back and reselect and things like that. And again, you can just kind of chain through and be like, okay. I think this is personally probably my favorite. There's been so many times I've had to reselect things that got accidentally deselected. Like if you're trying to select a bunch of edges on a body that you want to add a chamfer or fillet to, and you accidentally like select a face or deselect all, and then you're like, okay, well, that's 32 more faces I have to try to select again. It can get really annoying and tedious. And then just for fun, when you do something like that, you could always just make a selection set for future reference, but I find this one actually quite useful. And then sketch select, this one's pretty good. What this will do is this will look at your active sketch, and then it will populate this list with all the different sketch entities within that sketch. And then from here, you can easily select, okay, I want to select my fitted spline. It tells me, okay, there's only one in this sketch. Or if I want to select all my constraints, it'll say, okay, I have 14 different constraints. And then it populates the list of all the constraints. And then I can, oh, there it is. I was wondering when it would do that. I can go through and pick walk down, just using arrow keys up and down, and then it will highlight actually in the viewport as well, so you can see what is what. And for all you nerds out there, you can also turn on show API paths, and this shows you the actual index of each entity. So this is useful if you're going to write your own script. Say you're making a solid, or you're making a document and you want to use Python later on to recreate what you're making instead of having to manually go through. So this can be pretty useful to tell you what exactly you need to call upon in the API to get to that individual entity. And then from here, you can also make a selection set. Say, okay, I want all my coincidences to be in a selection set. Make a new one. Go to my selection set here. Maybe that won't work with constraints. Let's do points. Say I want these 5 points. Make a selection set. 7 items, sketch 1. There it is. So I guess this won't work with constraints. It's good to know for future reference. And then we can deselect all. And then same thing as before, we can say, okay, well, let's see. I want to zoom just to that so I know where it's at. This zoom is the same as the sketch to zoom earlier, just built in natively for this individual add-in. So that's another one I think is pretty useful for larger sketches. It might help you find different elements of it a lot easier. So, and then this will execute or terminate with finishing a sketch. And then this one's a work in progress, the tangent arc flip. And if you've worked with circles or arcs before in a sketch and they're constrained, and then maybe you make a big value change with your parameter, you notice that like your circle kind of goes. Let's see if I can do a really poor explanation. That's not going to do it. Arc. I don't think this is going to work either. That's why it's a work in progress. But sometimes you'll notice that this arc might flip over to the bottom like this, because in Fusion, it doesn't know it did anything wrong. It says, well, this arc is properly dimensioned, this arc is properly constrained, but it doesn't necessarily know which orientation, because it does have the arc you intended, but it also could be upside down, for lack of a better word, but still be properly constrained and have the dimension. So the idea would be to, once this is dialed in, to flip it backwards. And again, yeah, that didn't work. Let's try. And if we have something like that and we try to flip it, well, maybe that's not the intended effect either, but it did something. So sometimes when you have, again, arcs or fillets or circles in a sketch, they can kind of get wonky and, lack of a better word, pop to an unintended location while still being properly constrained within Fusion's rules. So that is something to work on. Once I can recreate that issue confidently, then I can dive back into that one. So, and then we have sketch constraint checker, which is just a super, this was one of my older ones, based off of the text command for, well, let me close that. Text command for sketches, where you can do like sketch.show under constrained, and then it'll highlight everything that isn't constrained. So if I were to delete this, I now have an unconstrained sketch, and this will tell me under constrained, 2 of the 5 entities are still free, blah, 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 blah. And it'll give you an idea. Won't solve it for you. I don't know if auto constraint is available in the educational or free version, hobbyist version of Fusion. This kind of defeats that, but maybe that's a good way for you to kind of check in on your sketches and try to solve those manually later on. Again, if you don't want it, turn it off. And then the last one is developer. This won't be for everyone. I don't expect it to be for many people actually. But what this will do is create another palette. And if you click on something or do a command, it'll tell you what Fusion is doing in the API under the hood. And then like say I clicked on this arc, it tells me, okay, this is what the API sees. So this is what we see. This is what the API sees. So again, if you want to start creating your own add-ins or scripts, this is a good way to kind of putz around and see what the different API calls are and what they're actually doing. My goal is to kind of try to create something like the developer mode in Blender, where everything populates with a shortcut or a tooltip for its Python command, which I think is super useful. Unfortunately, Fusion doesn't have that. So I'm going to try to dial this in to get as close to as possible to that. There are definitely some API and UI limitations, so I won't be able to perfectly replicate that. But certain things will hopefully populate. Again, that's a work in progress. I would consider all of these works in progress. But that's about it for now. Like I said, later on, if I want to add more, I can. And I just throw them into my folder. Wrong folder. Anyways, that's for the actual preferences for this and not the actual utilities. I'll go ahead and add that option in here too. So if you've ever made your own or you have something you really like, you can kind of throw in here as well if you want. This is just a way to have them better organized, all in one spot. Like I said, all of these are, I consider just kind of small, like quality of life improvements. So they don't really necessarily need to be their own promoted add-in. So again, if you want to give it a shot and see if it helps you out at all, that'd be great. If you run into any issues, please let me know on GitHub. I have my own specific workflow, and obviously everything I build is tailored to how I work because that's the only way I know how to work. So if you have a different pipeline or you do things differently, maybe some of these won't necessarily cooperate, which would be good to know because then I can go through and try to make these more agnostic for people's workflows. So I appreciate your time. Let me know your thoughts. And I think I mentioned it earlier, whenever I update this, you should get a little notification dot up here where you can then go to GitHub and see the releases and download a new release and update that. So thank you for your time.